She grabbed the boarding pass out of a sick child's hand and ripped it in half, right there in front of everyone. An 8-year-old girl, trembling with sickle cell disease, barely standing, clutching a stuffed elephant just to stay upright. And this flight attendant looked her dead in the eye, threw the torn pieces on the ground, and said loud enough for the whole gate to hear, "You people think you can scam your way anywhere." The little girl collapsed into her father's arms, crying, "Daddy, are we bad people?" But that flight attendant just made the worst mistake of her career, because minutes later, that father grounded the entire plane. Before we begin, subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, let's get into it. The day started wrong, and it never got right. Doctor. Adrian Carter woke up at 4:30 in the morning, not because his alarm went off, but because he heard his daughter crying in the next room. It was that sound, that particular sound, that every parent of a chronically ill child learns to recognize. Not a nightmare cry, not an "I want water" cry. It was the deep, guttural whimper of a body fighting itself. He was at her bedside in seconds. "Maya, baby, talk to me." She was curled into a ball, her small fists pressed against her ribs. Her lips had that faint blue tint that always made his stomach drop. 8 years old, and she already knew what a pain crisis felt like better than most adults would ever understand. "It's squeezing again, Daddy," she whispered. "It's squeezing my chest." Adrian placed his hand on her forehead. Warm, not burning yet, but warm enough to worry. He checked her oxygen with the portable monitor he kept on her nightstand, like other parents keep a glass of water. 91%. Not critical. Not safe either. He pulled out his phone and called Dr. Evelyn Rhodes at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. She picked up on the second ring because that was the kind of doctor she was. The kind who gave families like the Carters her personal cell and actually answered it. "Evelyn, she's at 91, pain in her chest and ribs. She had a mild episode last week but recovered. This feels different." Dr. Rhodes didn't hesitate. "Bring her in today, Adrian, not tomorrow. Today. I'll have the team ready. If her hemoglobin is dropping the way I think it is, we're looking at a transfusion window, and we don't want to miss it." Adrian closed his eyes. He already had the flight booked. American Airlines Flight 782, Newark to Atlanta, departing at 11:45. First class, because Maya needed the space to recline and the proximity to the front lavatory. He booked it 3 days ago when the last round of blood work came back, and the numbers told a story he didn't want to read. "We'll be there," he said. "I've got our flight." "Good. And Adrian, keep her calm. Stress is the worst trigger for her right now." He almost laughed at that. Keep her calm, as if he could control what the world threw at them. He packed her bag the way he always did, medications in a clear pouch, labeled and organized. Hydroxyurea, folic acid, a rescue inhaler just in case, her medical ID bracelet, a letter from Dr. Rhodes on hospital letterhead explaining Maya's condition, her medication needs, and authorization for emergency treatment. He'd learned years ago to carry that letter everywhere. Not because it should be necessary, but because he knew the world they lived in. He also packed her favorite stuffed animal, a worn-out elephant she called Peanut. She'd had it since she was 2. It was missing one eye, and the stitching on its trunk was coming loose, but Maya held onto it like it was the only thing between her and everything that scared her. And honestly, some days it was. Maya was quiet on the drive to the airport. She leaned her head against the window and watched the early morning light cut through the buildings of Newark. Adrian kept checking the rearview mirror, watching her face for any sign of worsening. Every parent does this with a healthy child. When your child has sickle cell, you do it like your life depends on it, because hers does. "Daddy," "Yeah, baby," "Are they going to put the needle in my arm again?" He gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "Maybe, sweetheart, but Dr. Rhodes is going to take really good care of you. Remember last time? She let you pick the color of the tape. I picked purple." "You did, and you were so brave." Maya was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I pick purple again?" "You can pick whatever color you want." She smiled. Just barely. Just enough. They arrived at Newark Liberty International Airport at 9:15. Adrian had built in extra time because he always did. He knew what navigating an airport with a sick child looked like. The stairs, the slow walking, the bathroom stops. The moments where Maya would need to sit down and breathe, and he'd have to crouch beside her and whisper that everything was going to be okay, even when he wasn't sure it was. Check-in was smooth. Their first-class tickets were confirmed. Adrian had booked them under his full name, Dr. Adrian M. Carter, and paid with the credit card linked to his personal trust account. There was no ambiguity. The tickets were real, the seats were real, the reservation was real. Security took a little longer because of Maya's medication bag. Adrian handed over the letter from Dr. Rhodes. The TSA agent read it carefully, nodded, and waved them through without any trouble. He even smiled at Maya and said, "Hope you feel better, sweetheart." And Maya, because she was Maya, said, "Thank you, sir," even while her hands were shaking. They made it to gate C12 with almost 2 hours to spare. Adrian found 2 seats near the window and helped Maya settle in. He draped his jacket over her legs like a blanket and handed her Peanut. "Rest if you can, okay? I'm going to check in with the gate agent and make sure everything is set for boarding. I'll be right over there. You can see me the whole time." Maya nodded and closed her eyes. She looked so small in that airport chair, so fragile, like the world could break her just by being too loud. Adrian walked to the gate counter and spoke with the agent on duty, a young man named Derek. "Hi, I'm Dr. Adrian Carter. I'm flying with my daughter today, seats 2A and 2B. She has a medical condition, sickle cell disease, and I wanted to confirm that our pre-boarding request went through. I also have a medical equipment bag that was tagged for cabin storage. Can you confirm that it's been flagged for the crew?" Derek typed quickly and nodded. "Yes, Dr. Carter, I see the pre-board note here, and the medical bag has been tagged. You're all set. We'll call you first when boarding begins." "Thank you." "Of course. Is your daughter doing okay?" Adrian paused. It was such a simple question, and the honest answer was no. No, she wasn't okay. She was 8 years old, and her body was at war with itself, and they were flying across the country because the best chance she had at a normal life was a blood transfusion in a hospital 600 miles away. But he didn't say any of that. "She's hanging in there," he said. "She's tough." "She looks it," Derek said with a kind smile. Adrian went back to Maya. She had dozed off, Peanut tucked under her chin. He sat beside her and pulled out his phone. 3 emails from his office, 2 messages from his sister, 1 notification from the airline app confirming their boarding time. Everything was in order. Everything was fine. Until it wasn't. Boarding began at 11:15. Derek announced pre-boarding for passengers needing extra time and families with small children. Adrian gently woke Maya, gathered their carry-on, and walked to the jet bridge entrance. He handed their boarding passes to the scanner. That's when he first saw her. Linda Graves. She was standing just inside the jet bridge door, arms crossed, clipboard in hand. Mid-50s, blonde hair pulled back tight, lips pressed together in a thin line that had nothing to do with professionalism and everything to do with judgment. She looked at Adrian. Then she looked at Maya. Then she looked at the boarding passes. And something shifted in her face. "Excuse me," she said. "These are first-class tickets." Adrian nodded. "Yes, they are. Seats 2A and 2B. She didn't move. She looked at the passes again, then back at him. "Can I see your ID?" Adrian pulled out his driver's license and handed it to her without hesitation. He'd done this before. Not the ID part specifically, but the prove you belong here ritual that black men in expensive spaces learn to navigate before they learn to resent it. Linda looked at the ID. She looked at the ticket. She looked at Adrian's face. Then she said, "I need to verify these. Step aside, please." "We have pre-boarding clearance," Adrian said calmly. "My daughter has a medical condition. Our status was confirmed at the gate counter." "I understand, sir, but I need to verify the purchase. These tickets are valued at over $2,000 each. We've had issues with fraudulent bookings." Adrian felt it then, that heat in his chest that he'd spent a lifetime learning to control. Not because the anger wasn't justified, but because his daughter was standing right beside him, holding Peanut with one hand and gripping his jacket with the other, and he refused to let her see her father lose his composure in a place where the world was already trying to make them feel like they didn't belong. My name is Dr. Adrian Carter. The ticket was purchased with my credit card. The confirmation is in the system. You can check it right now. Linda didn't check anything. Instead, she turned to another crew member who had walked up behind her, a man named Steve, and said, loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear, "We might have a ticket issue here. Can you hold them while I call the desk?" Steve looked uncomfortable, but nodded. And just like that, Adrian and Maya were standing to the side, while other passengers, white passengers, walked past them without being stopped, without being questioned, without being asked to prove that they deserved their seats. Maya tugged on Adrian's sleeve. "Daddy, why can't we get on the plane?" "We can, baby. There's just a small mix-up. It'll be fixed in a minute." But it wasn't fixed in a minute. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Passengers filed past them. Some glanced over with curiosity, some with sympathy. One woman, elderly, white-haired, with kind eyes, stopped and said, "Is everything all right here? This little girl looks like she needs to sit down." "And we're handling it, ma'am," Steve said, his voice clipped. "It doesn't look like you're handling it," the woman replied. "It looks like you're making a child stand in a hallway while she's clearly unwell." Steve said nothing. Linda returned, and the look on her face was not the look of someone who had resolved a misunderstanding. It was the look of someone who had already decided the outcome. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back to the gate counter. There's a discrepancy with your ticket that needs to be addressed." "What discrepancy?" Adrian's voice was still calm, but the calm was thinning. "What specific discrepancy are you referring to?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss it here. Please step back to the counter." "I will not step back to the counter. My daughter is sick. Her medication bag is already on that aircraft. We have confirmed, paid for first-class seats. I need you to tell me right now what the problem is." And then Linda did something that would change everything. She reached forward and pulled the boarding passes from Adrian's hand. Not gently, not professionally. She grabbed them, and in one quick motion, she tore Maya's boarding pass in half, right in front of her. Right in front of everyone. "You people think you can scam your way anywhere," Linda said. Her voice was not quiet. It carried down the jet bridge and into the gate area, where at least 40 passengers were still seated, waiting for their boarding group to be called. "I've been doing this for 22 years, and I know a fake booking when I see one. You're not getting on this aircraft." The silence that followed was deafening. And then came the sound that broke it. Maya, crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, the quiet, shattered crying of a child who has just been told in the most public and humiliating way possible that she doesn't belong. "Daddy," she whispered through her tears, "are we bad people?" Adrian Carter had faced a lot in his 44 years. He'd fought his way through medical school. He'd buried his wife when Maya was 3. He'd sat in hospital rooms watching his daughter receive blood transfusions with needles bigger than her fingers. He'd held her during pain crises so severe that she begged him to make it stop. And he couldn't. And he'd cried in the hallway afterward, where she couldn't see him. But nothing in his entire life had ever felt like this. His daughter, his sick, beautiful, brave little girl, was asking him if they were bad people because a woman in a uniform had decided that the color of their skin meant their tickets couldn't possibly be real. He knelt down in front of Maya. He took her face in his hands, and he spoke to her the way he always did when the world was too much. "Listen to me, Maya Rose Carter. You are not a bad person. You are the best person I know. And we are going to get on that plane. Do you hear me? We are going to get on that plane." Maya nodded, but her breathing was getting worse. He could hear it, that shallow, rapid pattern that meant her body was responding to the stress. And stress was the one thing Dr. Rhodes had told him to avoid. He stood up and turned to Linda. And for the first time, his voice carried an edge. "You just tore up a valid boarding pass for a sick child. You just publicly accused us of fraud with zero evidence. And you just denied a minor with a documented disability access to a commercial aircraft where her medical supplies are stored. Do you understand what you've done?" Linda's jaw tightened. "I'm following protocol." "No, you're not. There is no protocol that involves tearing a passenger's boarding pass without verification. There is no protocol that involves public accusations of fraud. and there is absolutely no protocol that allows you to separate a child from her medication. What you're following isn't protocol. It's prejudice. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones were out now, not one or two, dozens. Every angle, every word, recorded. A woman near the front of the gate area stood up. She was tall, professional, mid-40s, wearing a dark blazer and carrying a leather briefcase. She walked directly to the jet bridge entrance and spoke clearly. "My name is Denise Watkins. I'm a civil rights attorney licensed in New Jersey and New York. I've been watching this interaction for the past 15 minutes, and I want to be very clear about something. What I've just witnessed constitutes discrimination under Title II of the Civil Rights Act, violation of the Air Carrier Access Act, and potential criminal conduct under New Jersey's law against discrimination. I'm documenting everything. The airline should know that a formal complaint will be filed within the hour." Linda's face went pale, but she didn't back down. "Ma'am, this is an airline matter. Please return to your seat. It became a public matter when you raised your voice and tore up a child's boarding pass in front of 50 witnesses," Denise replied. "And it became a legal matter when you denied a disabled minor access to her prescribed medication." Another voice joined in, this time from a man who had been sitting quietly near the window. He stood up, adjusted his glasses, and spoke with the kind of calm authority that comes from decades of practice. "I'm Dr. Robert Kim. I'm a pediatrician at Mount Sinai. I've been observing that child since you stopped her at the bridge. Her respiratory rate is elevated. Her skin color is consistent with early-stage vaso-occlusive crisis. If she doesn't get to a calm, stable environment soon, with access to her medication, she could go into a full medical emergency. Right here, in this terminal. Do you want that on your conscience?" A gasp moved through the crowd. Linda looked at Steve. Steve looked at the floor. And Maya, standing between all of these adults, all of this noise, all of this chaos, held Peanut to her chest and whispered something that only her father could hear. "Daddy, I can't breathe good." Adrian's blood ran cold. He picked her up immediately. She was lighter than she should have been. 8 years old, and she felt like a feather because the disease had stolen her appetite and her energy and so many of the simple joys that other children took for granted. He turned to Linda, and his voice was no longer calm. It was the voice of a father standing on the edge. "My daughter is going into crisis. Her medication is on that plane. You need to let us through right now, or I swear to you what happens next will not be something this airline can walk back." Linda hesitated. For the first time, something flickered across her face. Not guilt, not compassion, fear. But she didn't move. "I need to contact my supervisor," she said. "Then contact your supervisor. But you let my daughter through that door while you do it." "I can't do that, sir." "You can't, or you won't." Silence. Dr. Kim stepped forward. "I'll go on record as a medical professional. This child needs immediate intervention. If you block her from her medication, you are personally liable for the outcome. Do you understand?" Linda's hand went to her radio. She pressed the button and spoke into it, her voice shaking now. "This is Graves at Gate C12. I need a supervisor and possibly medical assistance at the jet bridge." But it was too late for quiet resolutions, because the live streams had already started. A college student near the back of the gate area had been broadcasting to Instagram Live since the moment Linda tore the boarding pass. He had 47 followers when he started. Within 6 minutes, he had 12,000 viewers. Within 10 minutes, it was over 50,000. The hashtag appeared almost immediately. Let her fly. It spread faster than anyone could have predicted, not because it was clever, but because the video showed something that needed no explanation. A white flight attendant tearing up a black child's boarding pass, while that child stood there, sick and trembling, asking her father if she was a bad person. The internet didn't need context. The video told the whole story. News desks started calling the airline's communications office. Reporters at Newark who covered the transportation beat began heading to Terminal C. Social media managers at American Airlines started getting alerts, dozens of them, all at once, all saying the same thing. Something is happening at Gate C12, and it's bad. But inside that gate, Adrian Carter wasn't thinking about any of that. He wasn't thinking about hashtags or news cycles or corporate liability. He was thinking about one thing. His daughter's oxygen was dropping. Her fingers were cold. Her breathing was getting worse. And the one bag in the world that had what she needed, was sitting in an overhead bin on a plane that a woman with a clipboard and a grudge wouldn't let them board. He held Maya close. Her head was on his shoulder. Her grip on Peanut was loosening, and that scared him more than anything, because Maya never let go of Peanut. Never. "Stay with me, baby," he whispered. "Daddy's going to fix this, I promise." And then Adrian Carter did something that no one at Gate C-12 expected. He didn't yell. He didn't push past anyone. He didn't threaten or demand or make a scene. He pulled out his phone. He scrolled to a number that had no name saved to it, just a single star emoji, and he pressed call. It rang once. A voice answered. "Adrian? What's going on?" "Michael, it's Maya. We're at the gate. They won't let us board. She's going into crisis." There was a pause on the other end. Not a long one. Just long enough for the weight of those words to land. "Which flight?" 782, Gate C-12, Newark. "Don't move. Don't say another word to anyone. I'm handling this." The call lasted 11 seconds, and in those 11 seconds, the entire trajectory of American Airlines Flight 782 changed forever. Because the man on the other end of that phone was not a lawyer. He was not a journalist. He was not a friend with connections. He was Michael Reynolds, the CEO of the airline, and Adrian Carter's brother-in-law. What Linda Graves didn't know, what nobody at that gate knew, was that the quiet black father standing in front of her, the one she had accused of fraud, the one whose daughter's boarding pass she had torn in half, was one of the most powerful men in American aviation. His family trust held nearly 12% of the airline's stock. He sat on the company's medical advisory board. He had personally funded the airline's pediatric emergency training program 3 years ago, a program that Linda Graves had apparently never bothered to complete. And now, with his daughter gasping in his arms and her medication locked behind a door that bigotry had sealed shut, he had just made one phone call. 11 seconds, that's all it took. The gate monitor flickered. Then it changed. The status line that had read "on time" now displayed 3 words in red. "Flight delayed. Executive review." Steve saw it first. His face went white. Linda saw it second. She stared at the screen like it was speaking a language she didn't understand. Derek, the gate agent who had checked Adrian in earlier, saw it third. And unlike Linda and Steve, Derek understood exactly what those words meant. He'd been with the airline for 9 years. He'd seen executive holds before. They happened when someone very, very high up pulled the emergency brake on an operation. And they never, ever happened without consequences. The captain's voice crackled over the jet bridge intercom. "Gate C-12, this is Captain Morrison. I've just received a directive from corporate headquarters. We are holding position. No departure until further notice. Please advise all passengers." A low murmur swept through the gate area. Linda's radio went off. A voice she didn't recognize, sharp and urgent, said, "Graves, this is regional operations. Do not engage with any passengers." At her. He didn't say a word. He didn't at her. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The plane wasn't going anywhere, and neither was the truth about what had happened at Gate C-12. The red letters on the gate monitor burned like a warning flare. "Flight delayed. Executive review." And every single person at Gate C-12 read them. Every single person understood that something had just shifted. Something big. Something that Linda Graves, still standing at the jet bridge entrance with her clipboard clutched against her chest, could not undo no matter how hard she tried. But Adrian wasn't looking at the monitor. He wasn't looking at Linda. He wasn't looking at any of them. He was looking at Maya. Her breathing had changed again. It was faster now, shallow and uneven, like her lungs were working twice as hard to pull in half the air. Her forehead was damp. Her fingers, wrapped loosely around Peanut's trunk, were cold to the touch. And her eyes, those big brown eyes that usually held more light than any room she walked into, were glassy and distant. "Maya, look at me, baby. Look at Daddy." She blinked, slowly, like even that small effort cost her something. "I'm tired, Daddy." "I know you are, but I need you to stay awake for me, okay? Can you do that? Can you keep your eyes on me?" She nodded, but the nod was weak, and Adrian felt something crack inside his chest that had nothing to do with medicine, and everything to do with being a father who was watching his child slip toward the edge of a crisis, while the people who were supposed to help stood around doing nothing. Dr. Robert Kim was already moving. He had crossed the gate area and was kneeling beside Adrian before anyone else even processed what was happening. He placed 2 fingers on Maya's wrist, checking her pulse, and his expression changed immediately. Her pulse is thready. Respiratory rate is climbing. "Dr. Carter, how long since her last dose of hydroxyurea?" "This morning, 6 a.m. But her rescue medication, the one for acute episodes, it's in the bag on the plane." Dr. Kim looked toward the jet bridge. Then he looked at Linda, who was still standing there, frozen, radio in one hand, clipboard in the other, like a statue of everything that had gone wrong. "Ma'am," Dr. Kim said, and his voice carried the kind of controlled fury that only comes from someone who has spent 30 years saving children's lives. "There is a medical bag on that aircraft that this child needs right now. Not in 5 minutes, not when your supervisor arrives, right now. If you do not retrieve that bag, or allow someone to retrieve it, and this child's condition worsens, you will be personally responsible. Not the airline, not your supervisor, you. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Linda opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I've been told not to engage with passengers," she said. Dr. Kim stood up. He was not a tall man, but in that moment, he towered. "That child is not a passenger right now. She is a patient, and I am a doctor. And you are standing between me and my ability to help her. Move, or I will call 911 myself and report that an airline employee is obstructing emergency medical access to a minor." The gate area had gone completely silent. Not the uncomfortable silence of people pretending not to watch, the absolute silence of people who knew they were witnessing something that mattered. Steve, the crew member who had been standing beside Linda this whole time, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, almost apologetic. "Linda, maybe we should let them get the bag. We have orders to hold. The orders are to hold the flight, not to hold a kid's medicine." Linda shot him a look that could have cut glass. "I'm the senior crew member here, Steve. I make the calls." "Then make the right one," Steve said. And for the first time, his voice wasn't quiet. It was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Make the right call, Linda, for once." Something rippled through the crowd. A few people clapped. Not a lot. Just enough to make Linda's face flush red. But she still didn't move. Denise Watkins, the civil rights attorney, had been on her phone for the last several minutes. She ended her call and walked over to Adrian with purpose in every step. "Dr. Carter, I've just spoken with a colleague at the FAA Office of Civil Rights. A formal complaint is being drafted as we speak. I've also contacted the ACLU's Disability Rights Division. They're monitoring the live stream. And I want you to know, whatever happens in the next few minutes, every legal resource available is going to be behind you and your daughter." Adrian looked at her. His eyes were red, not from crying, from the effort of holding everything inside so that Maya wouldn't see her father break. "Thank you," he said. "But right now, all I need is her medication." "I know," Denise said, "and we're going to get it." 14 minutes had passed since the flight was grounded. 14 minutes since Adrian made the phone call. And in those 14 minutes, the world outside Gate C-12 had erupted. The hashtag #LetHerFly was no longer trending. It was dominating. Every major social media platform had it on the front page. The original live stream had been clipped, reposted, and shared so many times that the view count had become meaningless. Millions of people were watching. Millions of people were angry. News vans were already pulling into the airport's media access road. CNN had broken into their afternoon broadcast with a banner that read, "Discrimination at 30,000 feet." Fox News was covering it. MSNBC was covering it. Even international outlets, BBC, Al Jazeera, were picking it up. The airline's stock, which had closed the regular session at $47.12, was dropping in after-hours trading. Not crashing. not yet, but dipping steadily, like blood pressure falling before a collapse. Investors were watching the same live stream everyone else was watching, and investors, whatever their personal beliefs, understood one thing perfectly: liability. Inside the airline's corporate headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas, the crisis communications team had assembled in the executive conference room for an emergency session. 12 people around a long table, monitors on every wall showing the live stream, the stock ticker, and the social media metrics all at once. The numbers were moving in the wrong direction on every single screen. The head of communications, a woman named Patricia Langford, stood at the front of the room with her arms crossed and a look on her face that everyone in the room recognized. It was the look that said, someone's career was about to end. "What do we know?" she said. A junior analyst spoke first. The incident started approximately 22 minutes ago at gate C-12, Newark. A flight attendant, Linda Graves, 22 years with the company, refused to allow a passenger and his minor daughter to board. The daughter is 8 years old and has sickle cell disease. The flight attendant tore up the child's boarding pass and made racially charged statements in front of multiple witnesses. The entire interaction was captured on video by at least a dozen passengers and is currently being broadcast live across multiple platforms. Patricia closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When she opened them, she said one word: "Who?" The passenger is Dr. Adrian Carter. The room went dead silent. Every single person at that table knew the name, not because Adrian Carter was famous, because Adrian Carter was the reason half of them still had jobs. His family trust was the single largest individual shareholder in the company. He had personally blocked a hostile takeover attempt 2 years ago by refusing to sell his shares. He had funded the airline's Children's Health Initiative, its diversity training overhaul, and its medical advisory board expansion. He had done all of this quietly, without press releases, without interviews, without ever once leveraging his position for personal benefit. And now one of their employees had torn up his sick daughter's boarding pass and told him he was running a scam. Patricia picked up the phone on the conference table. She dialed a single number. "Mr. Reynolds, it's Patricia. I know you're already aware of the situation. I need to know how you want us to proceed." Michael Reynolds' voice came through the speaker. He was already in a car heading to the airport. His voice was calm, but it was the kind of calm that comes right before a storm makes landfall. "Here's what's going to happen, Patricia. I am going to be at that gate in 35 minutes. When I get there, I want Graves removed from duty. I want every supervisor involved in this pulled off the floor. I want a medical team standing by for Maya. And I want every camera in that terminal pointed at us when we make this right. Because we are going to make this right. Today, in front of everyone. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." "One more thing. Don't let anyone talk to Adrian. Don't let anyone offer him money. Don't let anyone try to smooth this over with corporate language. He doesn't want your apology package. He wants accountability. And he's going to get it." The line went dead. Patricia looked around the table. "You heard him. Move." Back at gate C-12, 26 minutes had now passed, and Maya was getting worse. Adrian had her in his lap on the floor. Not because there weren't chairs, because she couldn't sit up anymore. Her body had gone limp, and holding her upright in a seat was harder than cradling her against his chest, where he could feel every breath she took and count the seconds between them. Dr. Kim had called 911. An airport medical team was supposedly on the way. But the terminal was large, the response was slow, and every second felt like a minute, and every minute felt like an hour. "Daddy, Peanut's falling." Adrian looked down. The stuffed elephant was slipping from Maya's fingers. He tucked it back into her arms and held her tighter. "I've got Peanut, and I've got you. Am I going to the hospital again? Maybe, baby, but it's going to be okay. I don't want the big needle." "I know. Can they use the small one, the butterfly one?" Adrian's throat closed. The butterfly needle. She'd learned the name of it during her last transfusion because the nurse had told her it was called that because the wings on the sides looked like a butterfly. Maya had latched onto that because of course she had, because she was 8 and she turned every terrifying thing into something she could understand. "I'll make sure they use the butterfly one," he said. "Promise?" I promise. A commotion near the gate counter pulled Adrian's attention. 2 airport paramedics were pushing through the crowd with a medical cart. They'd finally arrived. "Over here," Dr. Kim called. 8-year-old female, sickle cell disease, possible vaso-occlusive crisis. Respiratory rate elevated, pulse thready, oxygen likely dropping. Her rescue medication is on the aircraft, and she has been denied access to it for approximately 30 minutes. The lead paramedic, a woman named Janelle, took one look at Maya, and her whole demeanor shifted from professional to urgent. "Okay, sweetheart, my name is Janelle, and I'm going to help you feel better, all right? Can you tell me where it hurts?" Maya pointed to her chest, then her side. Then she just put her hand down and closed her eyes. Janelle turned to Adrian. "Is she on hydroxyurea?" "Yes, and she has a rescue protocol. Oral morphine for acute pain and supplemental oxygen for saturation drops. The entire kit is in a blue medical bag tagged for overhead storage on that aircraft." He pointed toward the jet bridge. "She hasn't had access to it for over half an hour because the flight attendant refused us boarding." Janelle's jaw tightened. She looked at her partner. "Get on that plane and get me that bag. Now." Her partner headed for the jet bridge. Linda stepped forward to block him. "Ma'am, you cannot allow unauthorized personnel on the aircraft." Janelle stood up. She was 5'2" and she looked like she could take down a building. "I am an emergency medical technician responding to a pediatric medical crisis. That bag contains prescribed medication for a minor patient who is in acute distress. If you obstruct my colleague from retrieving it, I will have airport police here in 90 seconds, and you will be removed from this jet bridge in handcuffs. That is not a threat. That is a fact. Now step aside." Linda looked around. At Steve, who wouldn't meet her eyes. At the crowd, who were watching with barely contained fury. At the phones, dozens of them, all pointed at her, all recording, all broadcasting to a world that had already made up its mind about who she was. And finally, for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Linda Graves stepped aside. The paramedic disappeared down the jet bridge. 45 seconds later, he was back, carrying a blue medical bag with a white cross on the side and Dr. Adrian Carter's name written in permanent marker on the tag. Janelle opened it with practiced hands. She pulled out the portable oxygen unit first, fitted the child-sized mask over Maya's face, and turned on the flow. Then she located the oral morphine, checked the dosage label, and looked at Adrian. Standard rescue dose? 0.1 milligrams per kilogram. She's 24 kilograms. Janelle measured it out and administered it gently into Maya's mouth using the oral syringe. Maya flinched but didn't cry. She was too tired to cry. Within 3 minutes, her breathing began to slow. Not dangerously, normally. The oxygen was helping. The medication was working. The color was coming back to her lips, faintly, like dawn after a very long night. Adrian pressed his forehead against his daughter's and closed his eyes. His shoulders shook once, just once. Then he was still. Dr. Kim put a hand on his shoulder. "She's stabilizing. She's going to be okay." Adrian nodded but didn't speak. He couldn't. Not yet. The crowd at gate C12 had grown. It wasn't just the passengers from flight 782 anymore. People from neighboring gates had drifted over, drawn by the commotion, the phones, the energy that filled that space like static electricity before a lightning strike. There must have been 150 people watching now, maybe more, and they had all seen the same thing. A little girl denied her medicine, a father brought to his knees, an airline employee who chose prejudice over protocol and nearly caused a medical catastrophe. The murmuring had turned into open conversation. People weren't whispering anymore. They were talking. Loudly. "That woman should be arrested," said a man in a business suit near the window. "She's going to be fired before the day is out," said the woman next to him. "Fired isn't enough," said an older woman with a cane who had been watching from the beginning. "That little girl is going to carry this memory for the rest of her life. You don't get to untear a child's boarding pass. You don't get to unsay those words. Some things can't be taken back." She was right, and everyone knew it. At 38 minutes, something changed in the energy of the gate area. It started at the far end of the terminal near the escalators. A shift, a buzz, people turning their heads, security personnel moving with purpose. And then, walking through the terminal with the kind of stride that only comes from someone who owns the ground beneath them, Michael Reynolds appeared. He was flanked by 2 members of the corporate legal team and a woman from the communications department who was already on her phone coordinating with the press office. Behind them, 2 more security officers and a man carrying a medical kit marked with the airline's logo. Michael Reynolds was 51 years old. He had been CEO for 6 years. He was tall, silver-haired, and had the kind of face that looked like it had been designed for press conferences. But right now, that face wasn't designed for press conferences. It was tight with something that went beyond professional concern. It was personal, because Maya Carter was his niece. And Adrian Carter, the man on the floor holding her, was the husband of his late sister Grace, who had died of complications from an autoimmune disorder when Maya was 3. Michael had been at the hospital that night. He had held Adrian's hand in the waiting room. He had stood beside him at the funeral. And he had made a promise to Grace before she was gone that he would always protect her family. That promise was the reason he was standing in Terminal C at Newark Liberty International Airport right now, with cameras pointed at him from every direction, looking at a scene that made his blood boil in a way that no boardroom crisis ever had. He walked straight to Adrian. He didn't look at Linda. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the cameras. He knelt down on the floor beside his brother-in-law and his niece, and he spoke quietly enough that only Adrian could hear him. "I'm here. How is she?" "Stabilizing. They got her medication. But it was 30 minutes, Michael. 30 minutes she went without it because that woman decided we didn't belong in first class." Michael put his hand on Adrian's shoulder. "I know. And I'm going to make this right. Right now, right here." He stood up, and when he turned around, his face was no longer the face of a concerned uncle. It was the face of a CEO who was about to demonstrate in real time what accountability looked like. He looked directly at Linda Graves. She was still standing near the jet bridge entrance, but she had backed up against the wall, as if the wall could somehow protect her from what was coming. Her clipboard was gone. Her radio was silent. Her face was the color of ash. "Ms. Graves," Michael said. His voice was not loud, but it carried across the entire gate area with the weight of an avalanche. "My name is Michael Reynolds. I am the Chief Executive Officer of this airline. I have reviewed the security footage from this gate. I have read the initial incident report, and I have watched the same video that 40 million people around the world are watching right now." He paused, not for dramatic effect, because he needed to choose his next words carefully, and he knew that every single one of them would be replayed, analyzed, and remembered. What happened here today is not a misunderstanding. It is not a procedural error. It is not an isolated incident that can be explained away with corporate language and a settlement check. What happened here today is a failure, a moral failure, an institutional failure, and a personal failure by an employee who was entrusted with the safety and dignity of every passenger who boards our aircraft. Linda's lips trembled. She said nothing. "You are suspended, effective immediately. Your access credentials have been revoked. You will be escorted from this terminal by security, and a full investigation will determine whether criminal charges are appropriate in addition to your termination." A sound moved through the crowd. Not applause, something deeper. Something like relief mixed with grief, because the accountability felt right, but it couldn't undo what had already been done. Michael turned to Steve. "Were you present during the entire interaction?" Steve nodded. His face was pale. "Yes, sir." "Did you at any point attempt to override Ms. Graves' decisions?" Steve swallowed. "I suggested she let them get the medical bag. She refused." "Did you escalate to a supervisor?" A long pause. "No, sir, I didn't." Michael stared at him for a moment. "Then you are also suspended, pending investigation, because standing by while a child is denied medical access is not neutrality, it is complicity." Steve looked at the floor and said nothing. 2 security officers stepped forward and escorted Linda and Steve away from the gate. Linda walked with her head down, her shoes clicking against the tile floor in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. All of them. To everyone at this gate. All of them. To everyone at this gate. And to everyone watching this right now, I want to say something, and I want to be clear. This airline was built on the promise that every passenger, regardless of race, regardless of ability, regardless of background, would be treated with dignity. Today, we broke that promise, and a little girl paid the price. He looked down at Maya, who was still in her father's arms, the oxygen mask on her face, Peanut pressed against her chest, her eyes half open, and watching him with the quiet awareness of a child who understood more than any adult wanted her to. "Maya," he said softly, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry this happened to you, and I promise you it will never happen again. Not on my watch." Maya looked at him for a long moment, then she reached up with one small hand and touched his face. "Don't be sad, Uncle Michael," she whispered. "Daddy said we're going to be okay." Michael Reynolds, the CEO of a billion-dollar airline, the man who had faced congressional hearings and hostile takeovers and corporate warfare without flinching, closed his eyes and let out a breath that shook. Because an 8-year-old girl, after everything that had been done to her, was trying to comfort him. And in that moment, every person at Gate C-12, every person watching on every screen around the world, understood something that no press release or policy change could ever fully capture. The strongest person in that terminal was 4 feet tall and holding a one-eyed elephant. Maya's hand was still on Michael's face when the first news crew broke through the terminal security line. It was 44 minutes since the flight had been grounded, and Gate C-12 had become the center of something that none of them, not Adrian, not Michael, not even Denise Watkins with all her legal instincts, could have predicted. Janelle, the paramedic, checked Maya's oxygen again. 93%. Better than before, but not safe enough to relax. She adjusted the mask and looked at Adrian. "She's stable for now, but I'm going to be honest with you, Dr. Carter. She needs to be seen by her specialist. Not tomorrow. Today. If this was a vaso-occlusive episode triggered by stress, there could be secondary complications, spleen involvement, hemoglobin drop. She needs blood work and possibly a transfusion within the next few hours." Adrian nodded. He already knew all of this. He'd known it before they left the house that morning. That was the whole reason they were at this airport in the first place. Children's Healthcare of Atlanta had a sickle cell team that was among the best in the country, and Dr. Evelyn Rhodes had been managing Maya's case since she was 4 years old. Every delay, every minute, every heartbeat that passed without Maya being in that hospital was a minute too long. "Can she fly?" Adrian asked. Janelle hesitated. "Medically, I'd prefer she didn't. The cabin pressure, the altitude, those are risk factors for someone in her condition, especially after an acute episode. But if the alternative is a 12-hour drive, then flying with proper medical support is the lesser risk. She needs to be in Atlanta by tonight." Michael stepped in immediately. "She'll be in Atlanta by tonight. I'll make sure of it." He pulled out his phone and made 2 calls in rapid succession. The first was to the airline's operations center. He spoke in short, clipped sentences that left no room for questions. "I need a medical escort cleared for Flight 782. Full oxygen setup, cabin crew trained in pediatric emergencies, and I want a paramedic on board. Non-negotiable. Get it done in 20 minutes. The second call was to Dr. Evelyn Rhodes directly. Adrian had given him the number years ago for exactly this kind of situation. "Dr. Rhodes, this is Michael Reynolds, Maya's uncle. There's been an incident at the airport. She's had an acute episode triggered by extreme stress. She's stable now, but Janelle Torres, the EMT on scene, recommends she be seen within a few hours. We're going to get her on the flight. Can your team be ready when she lands?" Dr. Rhodes's voice came through with the calm urgency of someone who had spent her career racing against clocks that never stopped. "We'll be ready. I'm calling the hematology team right now. Tell Adrian to keep her hydrated and keep the oxygen going. And Michael, whatever happened at that airport, don't let anyone tell that child she's not brave. She's the bravest patient I've ever had." Michael ended the call and relayed the message to Adrian. Adrian's jaw tightened, and he pressed his lips against Maya's forehead without saying a word. Some things didn't need words. It was now 51 minutes since the grounding, and the gate area had transformed into something that felt less like an airport and more like a courtroom. Passengers who had been waiting to board Flight 782 were still there, not because they had to be, because they chose to be. They had watched a little girl get humiliated, denied her medicine, and nearly pushed into a medical crisis, and not a single one of them was going to leave until they knew she was okay. The elderly woman with the kind eyes, the one who had spoken up early on, had moved closer. She was sitting on the floor now, which couldn't have been easy at her age, about 15 feet from Adrian and Maya. She had taken off her cardigan and folded it into a small pillow that she had silently placed near Maya's feet in case she needed it. She hadn't said anything since then. She just sat there, like a quiet guardian, watching. Her name was Dorothy. She was 78 years old. She'd been flying to Atlanta to visit her grandchildren. And she had seen things in her life, things from the 60s that she never talked about, that made what happened at Gate C-12 feel like an old wound torn open. She caught Adrian's eye and gave him a small nod. Not a smile, a nod. The kind that said, "I see you. I see what happened, and it matters." Adrian nodded back. At 58 minutes, the situation inside the airline's corporate headquarters had escalated to a level that most of the executives had never seen in their careers. Patricia Langford was now coordinating with 3 different departments simultaneously. Legal was drafting statements, communications was fielding calls from every major news outlet in the country, and human resources was pulling Linda Graves' complete personnel file. What they found made everything worse. Patricia, it was James Okonkwo from HR, his voice tight over the conference line. "We've got a problem. A big one. Bigger than what's already happening?" Linda Graves has had 7 formal complaints filed against her in the last 4 years. 7. 3 of them specifically cited racial bias. 2 involved passengers with disabilities. 1 involved a mother traveling with a child who had autism. Every single complaint was reviewed by her direct supervisor, a man named Frank Dutton, and every single one was marked as resolved with no disciplinary action. Patricia's hand stopped moving over her tablet. "Are you telling me this woman had a documented pattern of discriminatory behavior and we did nothing?" "I'm telling you that someone did nothing, deliberately." Dutton signed off on every review personally. He overrode 2 recommendations for sensitivity training and 1 recommendation for suspension. Where is Dutton now? He's the shift supervisor on duty at Newark. He's been at Gate C-12 the entire time. Patricia closed her eyes. He was there? He was there and he didn't intervene? According to the security footage, he arrived at the gate approximately 8 minutes after the initial confrontation. He observed the situation, spoke briefly with Linda, and then walked to the staff lounge. He's been there ever since. The room erupted, not with shouting, with the kind of furious silence that happens when a group of professionals realizes that the problem isn't one bad employee, it's a system that protected her. Patricia picked up the phone. "Mr. Reynolds, we have new information. It changes the scope of this significantly." Michael was now at Gate C-12, but he stepped away to take the call. When Patricia finished explaining, the silence on his end lasted 4 full seconds. And then he said something that no one in that conference room would ever forget. "Find Dutton. Bring him to the gate. Now." At 1 hour and 6 minutes, the medical escort team arrived at Gate C-12. 2 nurses with pediatric emergency experience, a portable oxygen tank, and a travel medical kit that included everything Maya might need during the 2-hour flight to Atlanta. They were efficient and kind, and Maya, despite everything she had been through, looked up at one of them, a young woman named Sarah, and said, "Are you a doctor?" "I'm a nurse, sweetie, but I'm going to take really good care of you on the plane. Can you sit next to me?" Sarah smiled. "I'll be right there the whole time." "Can Peanut sit next to you too? He gets scared on planes." Sarah's eyes glistened. She nodded. "Peanut can sit right on my lap." Adrian watched this exchange and had to turn away for a moment. Not because it was sad, because it was exactly the kind of gentleness that his daughter deserved and had been denied by the person who was supposed to provide it. Michael returned from his phone call. His face had changed. There was a new layer of anger there, deeper than before, the kind that comes not from a single incident, but from learning that the incident was preventable. He walked to Adrian and spoke quietly. "There's more. The flight attendant had 7 prior complaints, 3 for racial bias, all dismissed by her supervisor, who was here at the gate today and did nothing. I'm dealing with it. Adrian's eyes darkened. 7 complaints, Michael. 7. And she was still working a cabin? Not anymore, and neither is the supervisor who covered for her. How many other passengers went through what Maya went through? How many other families had their boarding passes torn up or their dignity stripped and just didn't have the power to do anything about it? Michael didn't answer right away because there was no good answer. The honest answer was that he didn't know. And the more honest answer was that the system he ran had made it possible for him not to know. That changes today, Michael said. I give you my word. Your word isn't enough, Adrian said. And there was no malice in his voice, just truth. Words are what you put in press releases. I need structure. I need policy. I need accountability that outlives the news cycle. Then tell me what you need. Not here, not now. After Maya is safe. After she's treated. Then we sit down and we rebuild this from the ground up. Not for the cameras. For the next child who walks up to a gate and gets told she doesn't belong. Michael nodded. Done. At 1 hour and 14 minutes, Frank Dutton was escorted to Gate C-12 by 2 members of the airline's internal security team. He was a heavy-set man in his late 50s, with a reddened face and the look of someone who had just been pulled from a comfortable chair and thrust into a situation he thought he'd successfully avoided. He was wrong. Michael met him at the edge of the gate area, not in private, not in a back office, right there where everyone could see and hear. Mr. Dutton, Mr. Reynolds, I can explain the situation. Can you? Can you explain how an employee under your direct supervision accumulated 7 discrimination complaints in 4 years and remained on active duty? Dutton's mouth opened and closed. Those complaints were reviewed and resolved according to company protocol. Were they? Because I've just been informed that you personally overrode 2 recommendations for mandatory training and 1 recommendation for suspension. Is that accurate? Dutton's face went from red to white. Those were judgment calls. The complaints didn't meet the threshold for disciplinary action in my assessment. Your assessment. Michael's voice was quiet but lethal. Your assessment allowed a flight attendant with a documented history of racial bias to tear up a boarding pass belonging to a sick black child, accuse her father of fraud in front of 50 witnesses, and deny a minor with a life-threatening illness access to her prescribed medication for over 30 minutes. That is the result of your assessment, Mr. Dutton. Dutton said nothing. You are terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. Your access to all company systems has been revoked. And I want you to understand something, Frank. This isn't about one bad day. This is about 7 complaints that you buried because it was easier than doing your job. Dutton's jaw clenched. For a moment, it looked like he might argue. Then he looked past Michael, at the crowd, at the cameras, at the little girl on the floor with the oxygen mask and the one-eyed elephant, and whatever fight was in him drained out like water through a cracked pipe. He turned and walked away without another word. The crowd watched him go. No one clapped this time. There was nothing to celebrate. A man losing his job because he'd enabled years of discrimination wasn't a victory. It was evidence of how deep the rot had gone. At 1 hour and 22 minutes, Adrian carried Maya down the jet bridge. Sarah, the nurse, walked beside them, holding the portable oxygen tank. Dr. Kim had volunteered to fly to Atlanta on the same plane, just in case. Denise Watkins was on the flight as well, her legal pad already full of notes that would eventually become the foundation of the most significant civil rights case in aviation history. Dorothy, the elderly woman, had gotten up from the floor with difficulty. She walked slowly to Adrian before he entered the jet bridge and placed her hand on his arm. Young man, Adrian stopped. I was 14 years old when they told my mother she couldn't sit in the front of a bus in Birmingham. I watched her stand for 3 hours with groceries in her arms because a man in a uniform said she didn't belong there. That was 1962, and I thought by now things would be different. She looked at Maya. But this little girl just showed the whole world that they're not, and she showed them in a way that nobody can ignore. Dorothy paused. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. You tell her, when she's older, that an old woman from Alabama saw what she went through. And it mattered. It mattered more than she'll ever know. Adrian couldn't speak. He just took Dorothy's hand and held it for a moment. Then he nodded, and they walked onto the jet bridge. As they boarded the aircraft, something unexpected happened. The passengers who were already seated, the ones who had boarded before the incident, who had been sitting in their seats during the entire delay, wondering what was happening, had been watching the live stream on their phones. They knew exactly what had occurred at gate C12. They had seen Linda tear the boarding pass. They had heard Maya's question. They had watched the CEO fire 2 employees in real time. And when Adrian walked down the aisle carrying his daughter, the first-class cabin went silent. Then someone started to clap. One person. Then another. Then the entire cabin. Not the performative look-at-me applause that happens when a plane lands on time. Real applause. The kind that comes from the gut. From people who had just watched something ugly and were now witnessing something they wanted to be part of. Maya lifted her head from Adrian's shoulder. She looked at the people clapping. She didn't understand why. She was 8. She was tired. She was in pain. But she understood that these strangers were being kind to her, and that was enough. She raised her small hand, the one not holding Peanut, and gave a tiny wave. And that single, small gesture from a sick child on the worst day of her life broke something open in that cabin that could never be put back together. A businessman in 3C took off his glasses and pressed his fingers against his eyes. A woman in 4A turned toward the window and let the tears fall where nobody could see. A flight attendant, not Linda, a different one, a young woman named Maria who had just learned what her colleague had done, stood in the galley with her hand over her mouth, silently crying. Captain Morrison's voice came over the intercom. He had been briefed on everything. His voice was calm, professional, and unmistakably moved. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. I want to acknowledge what happened today at gate C12. As the captain of this aircraft, I take responsibility for every experience every passenger has from the moment they approach this plane until the moment they depart. Today, we failed one of our passengers. We failed a child, and that is something I take personally. We are now cleared for departure. Our flight time to Atlanta is approximately 2 hours and 15 minutes. I want everyone on board to know that this crew, this aircraft, and this airline will get Maya Carter to her doctor safely. That is my commitment, and that is my honor. The intercom clicked off. Adrian settled Maya into seat 2A. Sarah positioned the oxygen unit and made sure the line was secure. Dr. Kim took a seat directly behind them. Denise was across the aisle, her phone still recording, her legal pad open to a fresh page. Maya looked up at her father with heavy eyes. The medication was dulling the pain, and the oxygen was helping her breathe, but her body was exhausted from what it had been through. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby?" "That lady who ripped my ticket, is she gone?" Adrian swallowed hard. "She's gone, sweetheart. She's not going to bother us anymore." "Was she mad at us because we're brown?" The question hit Adrian like a physical blow. 8 years old. She had framed it the way a child would, not with the language of racism or discrimination or systemic bias, but with the only reference she had, brown, like a color, like something simple, like something that shouldn't matter. "Some people," Adrian said carefully, "some people make judgments based on how people look instead of who they are, and that's wrong. It's always wrong. But it says everything about them and nothing about us. Do you understand?" Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mommy was brown too, right?" Adrian's breath caught. Maya didn't remember her mother. She had been 3 when Grace died. Everything she knew about her mother came from photographs, stories, and the rare moments when Adrian could talk about her without his voice breaking. "Yes, baby, Mommy was brown too, and she was the most beautiful, smartest, bravest person I ever knew, just like you." "Do you think that lady would have ripped Mommy's ticket too?" Adrian closed his eyes. The answer was yes. He knew it was yes, but he couldn't say that to his daughter. Not today. Not while she was lying in a first-class seat with an oxygen mask on her face, because the world had, once again, told her she didn't belong. "I think," he said slowly, "that your mommy would have handled it the same way you did, with grace, with courage, and without ever letting anyone make her feel like she was less than she was." Maya considered this. Then she said, "I think Mommy would have been mad, though." Despite everything, Adrian laughed. A real laugh, short and surprised and full of love. "Yeah, baby, Mommy would have been real mad." Maya smiled, just barely, and then she closed her eyes, and within minutes, she was asleep. Adrian pulled Peanut from her loosening grip and tucked the elephant under her arm where it wouldn't fall. He adjusted her blanket. He checked her oxygen. He did all the small, careful things that a father does when his child is finally safe and he can stop holding the world together for one moment. Then he leaned back in his seat and stared at the ceiling of the aircraft. The engines were running. The plane was taxiing. They were leaving Newark, leaving Gate C-12, leaving the worst hour of his life behind them. But Adrian knew something that the millions of people watching the live stream didn't know yet. He wasn't done. He wasn't even close to done, because getting Maya to Atlanta was just the first step. The flight, the grounding, the firings, all of it was just the beginning. What Adrian Carter had in mind was something much bigger, much harder, and much more permanent than a viral video and a CEO's apology. He was going to change the entire industry. And he was going to do it not because he was powerful, not because he was wealthy, not because his brother-in-law ran the airline. He was going to do it because his daughter had looked up at him with tears on her face and asked, "Daddy, are we bad people?" And no child anywhere in the world should ever have to ask that question because of the color of their skin. The plane lifted off the runway at 1 hour and 47 minutes after the grounding. Maya slept through it, Peanut tucked under her arm, the oxygen mask fogging gently with each small breath. And 35,000 feet below, the hashtag #LetHerFly had reached every corner of the globe. The plane touched down in Atlanta at 4:17 in the afternoon. Maya had slept through most of the flight, waking only once when turbulence jolted the cabin and the oxygen mask shifted on her face. Adrian fixed it before she could fully open her eyes, whispering, "It's okay, baby, we're almost there." She mumbled something about Peanut and drifted back under. But Adrian hadn't slept, not for a second. He sat in seat 2B with his hand on Maya's arm, feeling the rhythm of her pulse through his fingertips, counting the beats like a metronome that was keeping his world from falling apart. Sarah, the nurse, checked her vitals every 20 minutes. Dr. Kim came forward once to listen to her breathing and gave Adrian a reassuring nod. Denise Watkins sat across the aisle with her laptop open, typing furiously, building a legal case that was already longer than most briefs she'd filed in her career. When the wheels hit the tarmac, Captain Morrison came back on the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived in Atlanta. I'm going to ask that everyone remain seated while we allow our young passenger and her family to deplane first. Medical personnel are standing by at the gate. Thank you for your patience today, and thank you for showing what it looks like when people stand up for what's right." Nobody argued. Nobody huffed or checked their watch, or made the impatient noises that usually fill a cabin when someone asks passengers to wait. They just sat there, quietly, respectfully. Some of them craned their necks to watch Adrian lift Maya from her seat, and a few reached out to touch his arm or whisper, "God bless her," as he passed. At the Jack Bridge exit, two things were waiting. The first was a medical team from Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, led by Dr. Evelyn Rhodes herself, who had driven to the airport the moment Michael's call came in. She was a small woman with silver-streaked hair and hands that moved with the precision of someone who had spent 25 years fighting a disease that most people couldn't even pronounce. The second thing waiting was a crowd. Not a mob, not protesters, ordinary people. Airport workers, travelers, families with children who had watched the Gate C-12 video on their phones and had come to Terminal B to see Maya arrive safely. Some held handwritten signs. One said, "Maya, we love you." Another said, "Let her fly." A little boy, maybe 5 years old, held a stuffed elephant above his head, and when Maya saw it, her eyes widened. "Daddy, that boy has a peanut!" Adrian almost lost it. Right there, in front of everyone. His throat closed and his eyes burned, and he had to take a breath so deep it hurt just to keep moving. "He sure does, baby." Dr. Rhodes stepped forward and placed her hand on Maya's forehead. Her expression shifted instantly from warm greeting to clinical focus. She's warm, pulse is rapid. Adrian, how long was she without her medication? Over 30 minutes. The vaso-occlusive episode started during the confrontation. Janelle Torres, the EMT in Newark, administered the rescue dose at approximately 12:15. She's been on supplemental oxygen since. We need to move. I've got a room ready in the hematology unit. We're going to do a full panel, check her hemoglobin, and prep for a possible transfusion. Sarah, can you give me a handoff? Sarah nodded and began relaying Maya's vitals from the flight, while Dr. Rhodes listened with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. They moved quickly through the terminal, Adrian carrying Maya, the medical team flanking them, and the crowd parting like water. A reporter shouted a question. Adrian didn't hear it. A camera flash went off. He didn't see it. The only thing that existed in his world at that moment was his daughter's heartbeat against his chest and the hospital that was 45 minutes away. They arrived at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta at 5:22. Dr. Rhodes had called ahead and the hematology team was waiting at the entrance. Maya was placed on a gurney, and for the first time since Newark, Adrian had to let go of her. It was the hardest thing he'd done all day, harder than confronting Linda, harder than watching the boarding pass get torn, harder than the phone call to Michael. Because his daughter was being wheeled through a set of doors that he couldn't follow through, and every instinct in his body was screaming to go with her. A nurse gently touched his arm. Dr. Carter, you can wait right here. Dr. Rhodes will come out the moment we have results. She's in the best hands in the country. Adrian nodded. He stood in the hallway, alone for the first time in hours, and the silence hit him like a wall. His phone had 217 missed calls. He didn't look at them. He sat down in a plastic chair, put his head in his hands, and allowed himself 10 seconds of the grief and rage and terror that he'd been holding back since 6 o'clock that morning. 10 seconds. That was all he could afford. Because there was more coming. He could feel it the way you feel a storm before you see it. At 5:41, his phone rang. Not one of the 217 missed calls returning. A new call. From a number he recognized. Senator Diane Mitchell, chair of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. Adrian stared at the screen for 3 rings. Then he answered. Dr. Carter, this is Diane Mitchell. I apologize for calling at a time like this, but I've been watching what happened today, and I want you to know that what you and your daughter experienced is not going to disappear into the news cycle. Not if I have anything to do with it. Adrian leaned back in the chair. Senator, with all due respect, I've heard promises from people in power before. I understand that, which is why I'm not calling to make promises. I'm calling to tell you that I've already initiated a preliminary inquiry into medical discrimination in commercial aviation. My staff has been compiling data all afternoon. What happened to Maya isn't an isolated case, Dr. Carter. We've found over 300 complaints filed with the DOT in the last 2 years alone, involving passengers with disabilities or medical conditions who were denied boarding, separated from medication, or subjected to discriminatory treatment. 300. And those are just the ones that were reported. Adrian's grip tightened on the phone. 300 families. 300 Mayas. 300 parents who had stood at gates and jet bridges and boarding doors and been told in one way or another that their sick child didn't belong. What are you proposing? He asked. Congressional hearings. Public. Televised. I want airline executives, disability rights advocates, medical professionals, and affected families to testify. I want the American people to see exactly how widespread this problem is. And I want legislation that gives it teeth, not guidelines, not recommendations, law. When? I'm targeting 6 weeks. Can you testify? Adrian looked down the hallway toward the doors where Maya had disappeared. If my daughter is healthy enough for me to leave her side, I'll be there. That's all I need. Take care of Maya first. The rest will follow. The call ended. Adrian sat still for a long moment, processing. Then he saved the senator's number in his phone. Not under her name, under 2 words. For Maya. At 6:14, Dr. Rhodes came through the doors. Her face was controlled, which Adrian had learned long ago meant she was managing information, not hiding bad news. Talk to me, Evelyn. Her hemoglobin is at 6.2. That's low, Adrian, lower than her baseline. The stress episode triggered a significant sickling event. Her spleen is slightly enlarged. The good news is there's no acute chest syndrome, and her oxygen is holding at 94% on room air. She needs a transfusion. She does. I've already typed and cross-matched. We'll start within the hour. She'll need to stay overnight, possibly 2 nights, depending on how she responds. Can I see her? She's asking for you. And for Peanut. She's very concerned that Peanut didn't get his own hospital bracelet. For the first time in 12 hours, Adrian smiled. A real smile. Small and tired and full of a love so fierce it could have powered the whole building. He walked through those doors and found Maya in a bed that seemed 3 sizes too big for her. She was hooked up to an IV, the oxygen cannula replaced by nasal prongs, and she was holding Peanut with both hands, like she was afraid someone might try to take him again. Daddy? Hey, baby girl. They said I need the needle again. I know, but remember what I promised? The butterfly one. The butterfly one. I already told Dr. Rhodes. Maya looked at the IV in her arm. This one isn't a butterfly. That one's just for fluids. The butterfly comes later. And you get to pick the tape color. Purple. Purple it is. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that stopped Adrian's heart. Daddy, when I grow up, can I be a doctor like you? You can be anything you want. I want to be a doctor for kids like me, so they don't have to be scared. Adrian sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her close, careful of the IV line, careful of everything, always so careful, because the world was rough enough without him adding to it. Then that's exactly what you'll be, Maya Rose Carter. She nestled against him. Daddy? Yeah? I don't think we're bad people. He held her tighter. No, baby, we are definitely not bad people. Outside the hospital, the world was on fire. The Gate C-12 video had been viewed over 90 million times in less than 8 hours. Every major network had run it as their lead story. International coverage had exploded. The BBC called it the most significant incident of airline discrimination in a decade. The New York Times had already assigned an investigative team. The Washington Post ran an op-ed titled, "The Boarding Pass Heard Around the World." The airline's stock had dropped 11% in after-hours trading. Analysts were calling it a brand crisis of unprecedented scale. The company's social media accounts were being flooded with hundreds of thousands of comments, most of them furious, many of them personal stories from other passengers who had experienced similar treatment. And in the middle of all of it, a hashtag had evolved. Let Her Fly was no longer just a moment, it was a movement. Organizations were rallying behind it. The NAACP issued a statement within hours. The American Civil Liberties Union announced they were joining Denise Watkins' legal team. The Sickle Cell Disease Association of America launched a fundraising campaign in Maya's name that raised $400,000 before midnight. Michael Reynolds held a press conference at the airline's headquarters at 8:30 that evening, Eastern Time. He stood alone at the podium. No PR team flanking him, no lawyers whispering in his ear. Just him and a microphone and the weight of what had happened. Today, a member of our crew committed an act of discrimination against a child. An 8-year-old girl with a life-threatening illness was publicly humiliated, denied her medication, and told she didn't belong on our aircraft. I'm not going to use corporate language to soften what happened. What happened was racism. What happened was cruelty. And what happened was a systemic failure that goes far beyond one employee. He paused. The room was packed with reporters. Camera shutters clicked in rapid bursts. The flight attendant involved has been terminated. The supervisor who enabled her behavior over a period of 4 years has been terminated. But I want to be clear about something. Firing 2 people does not fix this. It does not undo the trauma inflicted on Maya Carter. It does not address the 312 complaints of medical discrimination filed with the Department of Transportation in the last 24 months. And it does not absolve this company or this industry of its responsibility to do better. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. Mr. Reynolds, it's been reported that Dr. Carter is a major shareholder and that you're his brother-in-law. Critics are saying that this response would not have been as swift if the passenger had been an ordinary traveler. How do you respond? Michael didn't flinch. That's a fair criticism, and I'll answer it honestly. Would I have personally driven to the airport if this had happened to a stranger? I don't know. And that's the problem. The system should not require a personal connection to the CEO for a passenger to be treated with basic dignity. That's exactly the kind of structural failure we're committing to fix. Every passenger, regardless of who they know, regardless of their income, regardless of their race, deserves the same standard of care. And if it took this incident to expose how far we are from that standard, then I accept that responsibility. The room was silent. I'm announcing tonight that the airline will implement a comprehensive reform package. Mandatory bias training for every employee, crew, and ground staff alike to be completed within 90 days. A real-time discrimination reporting system accessible to passengers via our app. A dedicated medical accommodation protocol developed in partnership with Children's Healthcare of Atlanta and the Sickle Cell Disease Association of America. And an independent oversight board to audit our compliance on a quarterly basis. These are not suggestions. These are requirements. And any employee who fails to meet them will be separated from this company. Another reporter. What about compensation for the Carter family? Dr. Carter has declined financial compensation. He's asked instead for structural reform and public accountability. I intend to honor that request in full. A third reporter. Will the airline cooperate with the congressional inquiry announced by Senator Mitchell? Fully and without reservation. Michael stepped back from the podium. He had said everything he planned to say, and nothing more. He walked off stage without taking additional questions, and Patricia Langford took over to handle the logistics. Back at the hospital, Adrian watched the press conference on his phone while Maya slept. The transfusion had started at 7:45, and within an hour, her color had begun to improve. Her breathing was easier. Her grip on Peanut had loosened, not from weakness this time, but from comfort. She was sleeping the sleep of a child who finally felt safe. Denise Watkins called at 9:58. Adrian, I've just filed the formal complaint with the DOT and a parallel complaint with the FAA's Office of Civil Rights. The ACLU is co-filing a civil rights lawsuit in federal court tomorrow morning. We're naming the airline, Linda Graves individually, Frank Dutton individually, and requesting class action status on behalf of all passengers who experienced medical discrimination on this airline in the last 5 years. Class action, Adrian repeated. 312 complaints, Adrian. That's not a pattern. That's a policy. And we are going to prove it. I told Michael I didn't want money. This isn't about money for you. But those 312 families deserve compensation. And more importantly, they deserve discovery. When we subpoena the airline's internal communications, their complaint review processes, their training records, we're going to find a system that was designed to protect the airline, not the passengers. And when that evidence comes out in court, no amount of press conferences will be enough. They'll have to change. Not because they want to, because a federal judge will order them to. Adrian looked at Maya. She was peaceful. Her chest rose and fell evenly. The IV dripped steadily. Peanut was wedged securely under her arm. Do it, he said. I already have. At 10:30 that night, after the last nurse had checked Maya's vitals and dimmed the lights and left them alone in the quiet hum of the hospital room, Adrian's phone buzzed one more time. It was a text message from a number he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it. Then he read it. Dr. Carter. My name is Rosa Gutierrez. 3 years ago, my son Diego was denied boarding on an American Airlines flight because the crew said his wheelchair took too long to load. He has cerebral palsy. He was 9 years old. He cried the entire night. I filed a complaint. Nothing happened. I watched what happened to Maya today, and I cried again. But this time, I cried because someone finally fought back. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. On his lap, and looked at his daughter. On his lap, and looked at his daughter. 8 years old, 4 feet tall, oxygen prongs in her nose, hospital bracelet on one wrist, medical ID on the other, a stuffed elephant with one eye tucked under her arm. And she was somebody's hero. His phone buzzed again, another message, a different number. Dr. Carter, my name is James Washington. My mother has sickle cell trait. 5 years ago, she had a crisis on a flight, and the crew refused to divert. She nearly died. Your daughter's story is her story. Please don't stop fighting. Another buzz, another message. My daughter has epilepsy. We were removed from a flight last year because a crew member said she was a safety risk. Nobody listened. Maya's story is giving us courage. Thank you. Another. My son is autistic. A gate agent said he was too disruptive to fly. He was 6. Another. I'm a flight attendant. I've witnessed discrimination from my colleagues for years. I reported it. Nothing happened. Maya deserves better. We all deserve better. The messages kept coming, one after another. Strangers from every corner of the country pouring out stories they had been carrying for years. Stories that had been buried in complaint forms and customer service emails and bureaucratic dead ends. Adrian read every single one. He read them until midnight. Until 1 in the morning, until his eyes burned and his phone was at 3% and the only light in the room was the glow of the screen and the steady green pulse of Maya's heart monitor. And somewhere in that flood of pain and gratitude and rage and hope, Adrian Carter understood something that changed the way he saw everything that had happened that day. This was never about one flight attendant. It was never about one boarding pass. It was never about one gate. It was about all of them. Every family, every child, every mother standing with groceries in Birmingham in 1962, every father holding his sick daughter in Newark in the present day, every person who had ever been told by a uniform or a policy or a look that they didn't belong. He put the phone down. He pulled his chair closer to Maya's bed. He took her hand, the one that wasn't holding Peanut, and he held it gently. I hear them, baby, he whispered. All of them, and I'm not going to let them down. Maya stirred. She didn't wake, but her fingers tightened around his just slightly, as if even in her sleep, she knew her father had just made a promise he intended to keep. The heart monitor beeped steadily in the dark, and outside the hospital walls, 312 stories waited to be told. 312 stories. That was the number Adrian carried with him when he walked out of Children's Healthcare of Atlanta 2 days later, Maya on his hip, Peanut dangling from her hand, a discharge folder tucked under his arm. Her hemoglobin had climbed to 9.1 after 2 transfusions. Dr. Rhodes had called it a strong recovery, but she'd also pulled Adrian aside before they left and said something that stayed with him long after they drove away from the hospital. Adrian, her body bounced back, but her mind is going to take longer. She's 8. She understands more than you think. Watch for nightmares. Watch for anxiety around airports, uniforms, crowds. And if she starts asking questions you don't have answers to, don't pretend you do. Just be there. He'd nodded. He didn't trust his voice. Maya was quiet on the drive home. Not the quiet of a sleeping child or a tired child. The quiet of a child who is processing something that no 8-year-old should have to process. She held Peanut against her chest and stared out the window, and Adrian kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, waiting for her to speak, giving her the space to do it on her own terms. 20 minutes into the drive, she did. Daddy? Yeah, baby. Are people going to keep being mean to kids like me? Adrian gripped the steering wheel. He wanted to say no. He wanted to say the world had learned its lesson, that the video had changed everything, that no child would ever go through what she went through again. But he had promised himself a long time ago, when Grace died and he became Maya's only parent, that he would never lie to her. Not about the small things, not about the big ones. Some people might be, he said, but there are a lot more people who are going to fight to make sure it doesn't happen. And you're one of the reasons why. Me? You, Maya. Because of what you went through, a lot of people are paying attention now. People who can change the rules. People who can make things fairer. Because of the video? Because of you. The video just showed people who you are. They did the rest. Maya thought about this for a while. Then she said, I didn't do anything brave, Daddy. I was just scared. Adrian's eyes burned. Baby, being scared and still standing there is the bravest thing a person can do. She was quiet again. Then, very softly, Mommy would have been proud of me? Mommy is proud of you. Wherever she is so proud of you. Maya nodded. She hugged Peanut tighter. And she didn't ask any more questions for the rest of the drive. But Adrian was already thinking ahead. The messages on his phone hadn't stopped. They had multiplied. By the time Maya was discharged, he had received over 4,000 messages from strangers, parents, patients, flight attendants, pilots, disability advocates, civil rights lawyers, teachers, doctors. Every one of them had a story, and every one of them was asking the same thing. What happens now? Adrian knew what happened now. He'd been building it in his mind since the moment he sat in that hospital chair reading Rosa Gutierrez's text about her son, Diego. The press conferences and the firings and the hashtag were important, but they were reactions. What the world needed wasn't a reaction, it was a structure. Something permanent. Something that would outlast the news cycle and the outrage and the social media attention span that moved on to the next crisis in 48 hours. He called Denise Watkins on the third day. Denise, I want to talk about the foundation. Which foundation? The one we're going to build. I want to create a nonprofit, national scope, focused on 3 things: medical discrimination in transportation, disability rights enforcement, and sickle cell awareness. I want it funded, staffed, and operational within 6 months. Denise was quiet for a moment. That's ambitious. I know. You'll need board members, legal infrastructure, a policy team, fundraising, partnerships with hospitals, airlines, advocacy groups. It's a massive undertaking. I know that too. Okay, what do you want to call it? Adrian didn't hesitate. The Maya Carter Foundation. He heard Denise take a breath on the other end of the line. She's going to change the world, isn't she? She already has. 2 weeks after the incident, the federal lawsuit was officially filed. Denise Watkins, backed by the ACLU and a team of 12 attorneys from 3 different firms, filed a class action suit in the United States District Court for the District of New Jersey. The case was titled Carter versus American Airlines, and it named the airline. Linda Graves, Frank Dutton, and 3 additional supervisors who had been identified during the initial investigation as having knowledge of and complicity in the pattern of discrimination. The complaint was 214 pages long. It documented not just Maya's experience, but the experiences of 87 other families who had come forward in the 2 weeks since the video went viral. 87 families with children and adults who had disabilities, chronic illnesses, mobility challenges, and cognitive conditions, all of whom had been denied boarding, separated from medical equipment, publicly humiliated, or subjected to discriminatory treatment by airline staff. The discovery process began immediately, and what it uncovered was worse than anyone expected. Internal email showed that Linda Graves had been the subject of a formal investigation 2 years prior, triggered by a complaint from a Black family traveling with a child who used a feeding tube. The investigation had concluded that Graves' behavior constituted a violation of company policy. The recommended action was suspension and mandatory retraining. Frank Dutton had overridden the recommendation and written in his review, "Employee has a long tenure and strong performance metrics. Complaint does not warrant disruption to staffing." Strong performance metrics, that was the phrase that made national news, because it revealed something that no amount of corporate apologies could hide. The airline had valued efficiency over humanity. It had protected a discriminatory employee because she showed up on time and kept the boarding process moving. The system hadn't failed. It had worked exactly as designed, and it was designed to look the other way. 4 weeks after the filing, Senator Diane Mitchell convened the first public hearing of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. The hearing room was packed. Every seat was taken. Camera crews lined the walls. The overflow room was full. Adrian Carter testified first. He wore a dark suit and a purple tie, Maya's favorite color. He sat behind the microphone and looked out at the senators, the cameras, the gallery full of people who had come to hear him speak, and he felt the weight of every single message he had received, every parent, every child, every story. Senators, he began. 6 weeks ago, my 8-year-old daughter Maya was denied boarding on a commercial flight. Her boarding pass was torn in half by a flight attendant who looked at us and decided, based on the color of our skin, that we could not possibly belong in first class. My daughter has sickle cell disease. Her emergency medication was on that aircraft. She was denied access to it for over 30 minutes. She went into a medical crisis in the middle of an airport terminal, while airline employees stood by and did nothing. He paused, not for effect, because the memory was still raw, and it still cost him something to speak it aloud. I am a physician. I am a shareholder in that airline. I have the resources to fight back, but most families do not. Most families who experience discrimination in air travel do not have a brother-in-law who is the CEO. They do not have a civil rights attorney standing at the gate. They do not have a pediatrician volunteering to intervene. They have nothing but their boarding pass and their dignity. And when both of those are taken away, they have no recourse. He looked directly into the camera. I am not here to ask for sympathy for my daughter. Maya is strong. She is recovering. She told me last week that she wants to be a doctor when she grows up, so that kids like her don't have to be scared. I am here to ask for something much harder than sympathy. I am asking for structural change. I am asking for legislation that requires airlines to train every employee in medical emergency protocols, disability accommodation, and implicit bias. I am asking for a federal reporting system that tracks discrimination complaints in real time and holds airlines accountable for patterns of abuse. And I am asking for penalties, real penalties, not fines that get absorbed into operating budgets. Penalties that make it more expensive to discriminate than to do the right thing. The room was silent. Senator Mitchell leaned forward. Dr. Carter, you've mentioned that over 300 complaints were filed with the DOT in the last 2 years. How many of those resulted in meaningful disciplinary action by the airlines involved? 14, Senator. 14 out of 312. A murmur went through the room. Less than 5%, Senator Mitchell said. Less than 5%. Which means that 95% of families who experienced discrimination, who took the time and the emotional toll to file a formal complaint, were essentially told that their experience didn't matter. That is not a failure of individual employees. That is a failure of an industry. Rosa Gutierrez testified next. She sat in the same chair Adrian had occupied, and her hands shook as she held the microphone. But her voice didn't. My son Diego has cerebral palsy. 3 years ago, we were told that his wheelchair was too heavy to load and that we would have to take a later flight. There was no later flight. We were stranded. Diego cried for 4 hours. He kept asking me why the airplane people didn't want him. He was 9 years old. I filed a complaint. I received a form letter 6 weeks later saying the matter had been reviewed and closed. I never heard from anyone again. Until Maya. She looked at Adrian, who was sitting in the gallery behind her. Dr. Carter, if you're listening, I want you to know that your daughter gave my son something that no complaint form ever did. She gave him hope. Diego watched the video and he said to me, "Mama, they fought for her. Maybe someone will fight for me, too." And I told him, "Yes, mijo, someone will." The hearing lasted 3 days. 22 witnesses testified, families, doctors, airline employees who had witnessed discrimination and reported it with no result, disability rights advocates, medical professionals, legal scholars. Each testimony added another layer to a picture that was becoming impossible to ignore. On the final day, the committee voted unanimously to advance the Air Passenger Medical Protection Act to the full Senate. The bill, drafted with direct input from Adrian Carter and the legal team at the ACLU, included mandatory medical emergency training for all airline personnel, a federal real-time discrimination reporting portal, quarterly compliance audits, and financial penalties starting at $500,000 per violation, with escalation for repeat offenses. It passed the Senate 7 weeks later. The House followed within a month. The president signed it into law on a Tuesday afternoon, and Adrian Carter stood in the room when it happened, wearing a purple tie, holding a photograph of Maya that Grace had taken when she was 2 years old, laughing in a field of sunflowers. He didn't speak at the signing ceremony. He didn't need to. The law spoke for itself. Back in Atlanta, the Maya Carter Foundation opened its doors 5 months and 3 days after the incident at Gate C-12. Adrian had poured everything into it. His time, his money, his connections, his grief, his rage, and his love. The Foundation's headquarters were modest, a converted office building near the hospital, but its reach was anything but. Within the first year, the Foundation funded sickle cell research grants at 12 universities. It partnered with 4 major airlines to develop the industry's first standardized medical accommodation protocol. It created a scholarship program for minority students pursuing careers in aviation, medicine, and civil rights law. And it launched a national awareness campaign about sickle cell disease that reached over 50 million people. Dr. Kim, the pediatrician from Mount Sinai who had stood up at Gate C12 and demanded that Linda Graves let Maya access her medication, joined the Foundation's medical advisory board. He flew to Atlanta once a month, on his own dime, to work with Dr. Rhodes on pediatric emergency guidelines for transportation settings. Denise Watkins, the civil rights attorney who had started documenting the incident before she even knew Adrian's name, became the Foundation's chief legal officer. The class action lawsuit settled 18 months after filing. The airline paid $140 million, the largest discrimination settlement in aviation history. Every cent of the Carter family's portion went directly into the Foundation. Dorothy, the 78-year-old woman who had sat on the floor at Gate C12 and told Adrian about her mother in Birmingham, became the Foundation's first honorary board member. She attended every meeting. She never missed one. And at every meeting, she told the same story about her mother standing with groceries for 3 hours on a bus in 1962. And every time she told it, someone in the room cried. Because the distance between that bus and Gate C12 was 60 years and no distance at all. Sarah, the nurse who had held Peanut on her lap during the flight to Atlanta, left the airline's medical response team and joined the Foundation full-time. She built the pediatric emergency training program from scratch, and within 2 years, it had been adopted by 6 of the 10 largest airlines in the United States. Captain Morrison, who had held the plane and made the announcement that moved an entire cabin to tears, retired the following year. At his retirement ceremony, he was asked what the most important flight of his career had been. He didn't hesitate. Flight 782, Newark to Atlanta. Because that was the day I learned that being a captain isn't about flying a plane. It's about protecting the people inside it. And Maya. Maya Carter, the girl with the one-eyed elephant and the butterfly needle, and the disease that tried to break her every single day, went back to school 3 weeks after the incident. She walked into her 3rd grade classroom, and her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had put a sign on her desk that said, "Welcome back, Maya." Her classmates had drawn pictures of elephants, 23 pictures. Every single one of them had 2 eyes, because her classmates wanted Peanut to see better. Maya laughed so hard she had to sit down. She didn't talk about Gate C12 at school, not at first. She was 8, and 8-year-olds process trauma the way rivers process rocks, slowly, over time, wearing them down into something they can carry. She had nightmares for a while. She was nervous around airports. She once froze when she saw a woman in an airline uniform at the grocery store, and Adrian had to kneel down and hold her until the shaking stopped. But she healed. Not all at once, not perfectly, but steadily, the way children do when they are loved fiercely and protected without hesitation. On her 9th birthday, Maya asked her father for one thing. Not a toy, not a party, not a trip. She asked to visit Gate C12. Adrian's first instinct was to say no. Every protective impulse in his body screamed against it. Why would he take his daughter back to the place where she had been humiliated, denied her medicine, and asked if she was a bad person? Why would he reopen that wound? But Dr. Rhodes had told him something during one of Maya's follow-up appointments that he couldn't shake. Children who face their trauma environments with support often recover faster than children who avoid them. If she's asking Adrian, it means she's ready. So he took her. They flew to Newark on a Saturday morning, first class, American Airlines. The same airline, Adrian had considered a different carrier, but Maya had been specific. "I want to go on the same one, Daddy. I want to show them I'm not scared." They landed at Newark Liberty at 10:45 in the morning. They walked through the terminal together, hand in hand, Maya carrying Peanut, Adrian carrying everything else. When they reached Gate C12, it was quiet, a normal gate on a normal day. Passengers waiting for a flight to Charlotte, A gate agent typing at the counter. Nothing remarkable. Nothing dramatic. Maya stood in front of the seats where she had waited that morning 8 months ago. She looked at the jet bridge entrance. She looked at the spot on the floor where her father had held her while the paramedic worked. She looked at the gate monitor, which read, "On time," in calm green letters. And she said, "It's just a gate, Daddy." Adrian looked at her. "Yeah, baby, it's just a gate. It's not scary anymore." "No?" "No, because you were here, and Dr. Kim was here, and the lawyer lady, and the old lady with the nice eyes, and Janelle, and the people who clapped on the plane." She paused. "Even the mean lady was here, but she's gone, and we're still here." Adrian knelt down in front of his daughter the same way he had 8 months ago when she asked if they were bad people. He took her face in his hands. He looked into those big brown eyes that held more courage and more wisdom than most adults would accumulate in a lifetime. "You're right, Maya. We're still here." She smiled. A full smile. Not the weak, tired smiles of the hospital or the careful smiles of the weeks after. A real one. The kind that started in her eyes and spread across her whole face and made everything, every nightmare, every needle, every torn boarding pass, every fight that was still to come, feel like it was going to be okay. "Can we get ice cream, Daddy?" Adrian laughed. "Yeah, baby, we can get ice cream." They walked away from gate C12 together, hand in hand, Maya's sneakers squeaking on the terminal floor, Peanut's one eye gazing out at the world from the crook of her arm. Behind them, the gate monitor flickered once and then went still. Just a gate, just a number. Just a place where planes came and went and people moved through on their way to somewhere else. But for the rest of the country, gate C12 would never be just a gate again. It was the place where an 8-year-old girl was told she didn't belong. The place where her father refused to accept it. The place where strangers stood up and doctors spoke out and cameras caught the truth and a billion-dollar company was forced to look at itself and admit that it had failed. It was the place where one torn boarding pass changed an entire industry. 6 months later, Maya started 4th grade. She wore a purple backpack. She carried Peanut in the front pocket, his one eye peeking out through the zipper. And on the first day of school, when her teacher asked each